Hey everyone, I'm Kevin. Today in the Victory 4x4 garage, we're going to be installing our engine, transmission, and transfer case skid system here on our 2022 Nissan Frontier. Now I'll give you a quick rundown of the tools needed to complete this install. Keep in mind this may vary slightly depending on the tools you have available to you. So we have a 3/8 and a 1/2 inch drive impact right here, a 10, a 12, a 13 millimeter, a 9/16 and 17 millimeter socket, a 9/16 wrench, a 1/2 inch wrench. You're going to want a decent drill because you have a couple holes to drill specifically on the TK skid. Those you'll be opening up to 5/16, so make sure you have pretty much just a standard drill bit set available to you there, a center punch to get those holes started. Of course, wear some safety glasses when doing that. You'll want a 3/16 T-handle or hex driver. Either one should work for what we're doing there. And then we also used a screwdriver, mostly as an alignment tool for our 3/8 nut, a magnet, which helped us out with the nut and washer situation there as well. And then off camera, we have been installing a little bit of anti-seize lubricant on every bolt before it went into place. We just didn't really show that because it's kind of messy and a little bit boring to watch every single time. Now this video will be a full install overview of our full Frontier skid system. We're going to start things out with our engine skid that you can kind of see here. This will come with obviously the engine skid itself, the front access door, as well as one black powder coated washer. Then of course you will also receive a bolt pack which contains the hardware you need to get this installed, and we'll overview that along the way. Now before we can install any of your new skids, we have to do some disassembly work here underneath the vehicle, getting these factory stamped steel pieces removed. As you can kind of see, ours is already equipped with our Blitz front bumper, so the disassembly on the front edge here is going to vary a little bit from what you might encounter if you're installing this on a stock front bumper vehicle. So for a more detailed look at that, you can always check out the Blitz front bumper video, and that'll kind of overview that disassembly. In this configuration, we're going to start by removing the 2 button head bolts up here using our 3/16 hex. You can then grab a 10 millimeter and remove the 2 bolts on the outside here holding the back edge of this skid in place. These are just slotted holes, so be aware of that. As soon as you get these just a little bit loose, this can slide forward. Then moving back to this kind of diff skid here, there will be 4 bolts holding this in place. These are aftermarket, so yours might look a little bit different, but this is where you should need your 12 millimeter socket. Then moving further back to the transfer case skid, still using that 12 mil socket, you have 4 bolts here just along the front edge holding it in place. This one and this one are slotted, so just be aware of that. Additionally, you'll need a 17 millimeter socket. You'll be removing the 2 factory bolts you see here on each side. This configuration you see here is our Blitz bumper already installed, obviously. In the factory orientation, these will be holding in your tow hook as well, so you'll have to pull that tow hook down and it can be reinstalled after your skid is in place. Now you can grab that black square washer as well as the 3/8 serrated flange nut. You'll be sliding this in here. This is, for reference, the rear of the driver's side lower control arm. So you'll slide this into the bottom of this cross member and push it across until it lines up with this first hole here. And then for the nut, you'll have to slide that down over the top. There's a hole basically right over here, just offset from that. You can take a screwdriver, push it up through the top of the hole, and then just drop that nut right down on the screwdriver, kind of help guide it into that hole. And that lines it up perfectly with the washer here. With the prep work done, we can now grab our skid and begin lifting it into position and starting some of our hardware. I'm doing this with a transmission jack since we got our truck up on a hoist. You can pretty much achieve the same thing with a floor jack in your driveway or your garage if that's how you're installing this. I'm going to start out with the larger factory hardware out here on the side just because these are easiest to handle and these mounts are pretty much the easiest to access.
Then we can grab two of our 5/16 button heads and install them into the slots here on the front edge. Those are threading up into clip nuts installed on the bumper during the bumper installation. And then again, those of you installing this with a stock front bumper, we provide you 5/16 serrated flange nuts to go on the top side of these bolt locations. Now moving toward the center of the skid, there's going to be a recessed mount up inside of these two round cutouts. For that, you'll find the long M8 flange hex head bolts. You will install washers on these as well, and then grab your 13mm socket to get these installed. Now before you get this rear hardware installed, you'll also want to find this spacer. This is going to have to go above the engine skid, between it and the frame cross member up here. That hardware should be supporting the skid pretty well now, so you can get your jack down out of the way and then work on the rear flange of the skid here. The first two bolts going in are on the passenger side, and the center slot right here, those are going to be two more of those M8s with washers. Then lastly, coming over to the driver's side, this will be the whole location where you installed the square washer and the nut earlier. You'll find the 3/8 by 1.5 inch long hex head bolt along with a washer. You may need to kind of reach back through that hole in the top just to temporarily hold the nut while you get this one installed. Admittedly, this whole location can be just a little bit tedious, so take your time with it. Once you get that started, you can reach through the side with your 9/16 wrench and find that nut, and then you will want a 9/16 socket ideally to turn the bolt out here. Now, those of you that are only installing the engine skid at this time can center this up and tighten up all your hardware. Since we're going to be installing our full skid system today, I'll kind of leave this loose for now and proceed with the transmission skid. Along those same lines, those of you that are finishing up your engine skid can now install your oil filter access door here. So for that, you'll obviously need the door. We're going to provide you two more 5/16 button heads to go in each of those holes, along with serrated flange nuts for the back side. You will need to just reach through the side here to get those nuts installed. And of course, use your 3/16 hex on your button heads. Once both of those are started, just center it up as needed in the opening and tighten it in place. This is where, if you're having any trouble at all with the nuts, you'll need your 1/2 inch wrench as well. Now, as we've kind of implied to this point, the transmission skid is going to share the same mounting location as the rear of the engine skid. With that, we're going to need to remove these 3 bolts. Those of you installing the full skid system could simply leave these 3 out until your transmission skid is in place. Now, along those same lines, that spacer that we installed earlier will now need to go on top of the transmission skid when we layer it in here above the engine skid. Now, as we move into the transmission skid, here you can kind of get a quick look at it before we get started. The flange back here towards me with 4 mounting holes is going to go toward the rear of the vehicle, leaving the 3 to go toward the front where it overlaps that engine skid. So just like the engine skid, you're going to receive a hardware pack for this one, and then this will pretty much install with all the same tools as the engine skid did. You will also get an additional one of these spacers, which I did not mention at the very beginning of this video. So if you're installing the full skid system, you ordered the engine skid, you ordered the transmission skid, you're doing this at the same time, you will actually wind up with 2 of these because each skid is going to come with one to make sure we got you covered there. You want to make sure to only install one when installing the full skid system. Now, with the way these naturally overlap during install, you'll wind up with the transmission skid on top. Therefore, you want to put that spacer here on top of the trans skid. Now, just like when you installed the engine skid, you'll throw your skid plate up on a jack of some sort and get it lifted into place. You'll get it overlapped again above the back edge of this skid with that spacer up top, and then install those 2 M8 bolts and the 3/8 bolt over here. One more tool that did help us out a couple times over here, just holding the nut during this install, is a small flexible head magnet like I have here.
Now the back of the skid is just going to use 4 of those M8 flanged hex head bolts with washers that we used earlier on, and those are going into factory threaded holes in this cross member. Now just like before, our transfer case skid is going to overlap the back edge of this transmission skid. So those of you stopping here, go ahead and line everything up, tighten everything up now. Since we're moving on to that TK skid, I'm going to pull these 4 bolts, grab that skid, and we can proceed. So here's a quick look at that TK skid before we get it installed. This 4-hole flange is going to be the front. These kind of stepped up mounting wings are going to go out toward the frame rails, and then any of these flanges you see here always go up to keep the bottom side nice and smooth. Much like the other skids, you're always going to receive a hardware pack. Again, this shares hardware along that front edge, and then you'll have 3/8 thread cutting bolts for the 4 main holes toward the rear. So just like before, I'll throw this up on our jack. We'll get it back there underneath the truck and continue on. Now just like before, we put the TK skid on top of the trans skid now, and we're just going to line up and reinstall our 4 M8 hex heads across the front here. With those 4 bolts started, you can now center the 2 skids up kind of with one another using the edges where they overlap, as well as make sure they're centered on the frame using those bolt-on wings out here on the edge, and then kind of snug these up for now. Now on the rear mounting holes, what you'll have to do once this is all centered up is find a center punch. You'll come to the center of each slot and mark these out. Then you'll have to drill this out to 5/16 to accept these 3/8 thread cutting bolts. Now you can do that in multiple ways. You can use conventional drill bits, starting with a small pilot hole and stepping your way up, or a step bit or a unibit like I have here. That's really entirely up to you. Just make sure, regardless of what style drill bit you choose to use, you at least throw on some safety glasses before you get started. Now on the front hole here, even if you use a step bit or a unibit, you will likely have to finish this up with a conventional twist drill as you are drilling through multiple layers of frame material here. Once you have that opened up to 5/16, you can grab the 3/8 thread cutting bolt, your 9/16 socket on your impact, and both install the bolt and cut these threads. So as you can see, this front hole tapped a little bit more difficult than the rear. That's due to that multi-layer material on the front side. That being said, if you have a tap and die set, you can always tap these conventionally in that manner. The thread here is 3/8/16. So once you finish that up, go ahead and repeat the process over on the other side, and then you can work your way back through and tighten up all the remaining hardware on all 3 skids. So then if you are installing a gas tank skid as well as even front lower control arm skids all at the same time, go ahead and check out the installation videos for those on their individual product pages where you purchase those items. So that's a wrap for our main skid system install, consisting of the engine, transmission, and transfer case skids. If you guys have any questions at all about this installation or anything else we offer here at Victory 4x4, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can always email us at info@victory4x4.com or call us at 269-459-8447.